Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Supermarine Spitfire Mk a Tier 2 battle rating 3.7 British fighter aircraft. In terms of historical overview, as we provided a rather conclusive overview as to the Spitfire Mark II as seen in our Spitfire Mark IIa review, link available in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now, where we covered all the way through to the Spitfire Mark IIb subvariant. Today's historical overview is going to focus on the development of the cannon-armed Spitfire and the eventual 4 machine gun 2 cannon armament as standardised throughout the Spitfire series. With that, let us begin. In order to improve the firepower available to the Spitfire pilot, Joseph Smith, the designer of the plane following Reginald Mitchell's death in June of 1937, whereby Mitchell was the original designer of the Spitfire and did not live to see his creation come to fruition, was asked by the Royal Air Force in December of 1938 to formulate a design based on the Spitfire Mark I, whereby a single 20mm Hispano Mark I cannon would be mounted under each wing. Smith rejected the underwing armament concept, instead designing an installation whereby the cannon were mounted within the wing. To do this, the cannon were turned on their sides and minor external wing blisters were made on both the upper and lower wing surfaces in order to accommodate the cannon's 60 round drum magazine. The first cannon-armed Spitfire, designated L1007, was completed in the latter half of 1939 and posted to Drem, Scotland at the start of January 1940 for testing. On the 13th of January, the Cannon Spitfire was to score its first aerial victory, whereby its pilot, Pilot Officer George Proudman of 602 Squadron, shot down a Heinkel HE-111 bomber. Based on this success, Supermarine was contracted to convert 30 Spitfire Mark Is, i.e. the machine gun armed variant at the time, to accommodate the cannon armed wing, with the first of these aircraft being delivered in June 1940. This led to the redesignation of the Mark I, whereby the Mark Ia referred to the 8 7.7mm Browning machine gun armed aircraft, the original, and the Mark Ib subvariant to the new cannon armed variant. However, as the Mark Ib saw increasingly regular service with 19 Squadron during the Battle of Britain, issues with the early 20mm cannon installations were discovered. In particular, the cannon had a high tendency to jam. In one engagement in particular, only 2 Mark Ibs in a group of 12 had actually been able to fire off all of their ammunition, the other 10 saw jams at some point. Additionally, only a total of 120 cannon rounds and no machine guns were available. This meant that ammo was limited, and so the decision was taken by the end of the Battle of Britain to standardise the armament on the Spitfire to 2 20mm Hispano cannon and 4 7.7mm Browning machine guns. In all, only 30 Mark Ibs were produced, with the last 6 of these aircraft arriving by the end of 1940. It was these 6 aircraft that saw the installation of the standardised wing armament that would prove commonplace on the Mark IIb onwards. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the Spitfire Mark IIb handles in the skies of War Thunder's arcade mode. Today's gameplay is brought to you from the Domination map Peleliu. For this we'll be using the following setup. Stealth belts for all types of armament, reasoning being that in our experience the stealth belts have proven the most effective, whereby the stealth belts for our machine guns consist of 2 armour-piercing incendiary rounds backed up by a single incendiary round, which means that we can set foes on fire quite nicely and cause them to burn to death in the long haul, especially when we're out of 20mm cannon ammunition. For our cannon meanwhile, the stealth belts are dominated by high explosive fragmentation incendiary rounds of a given nature, and these rounds are very effective against fighters and bombers alike when they hit. For our gun convergence, we're using a 400m gun convergence, logic being that our overall playstyle is not going to be dedicated to turn fighting, interception or boom and zoom tactics, but a mixture, and a 400m gun convergence provides us with the variability we need to be able to accommodate multiple playstyles over the course of a given match. Of course, this comes with the drawback that we're not equipped with a particular gun convergence to deal with a certain playstyle at a given point, which can lead to some frustrating results when you have a target clearing your sights, as you will see over the course of this gameplay as well. As for our fuel load, we have a 30-minute fuel load as per the norm to ensure we can make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. Now straight away what we can see in terms of climb rate is that the Spitfire Mark IIb's climb rate is essentially the same as that of the Mark IIa, and we could extend that to say that the flight model and indeed the performance is practically the same as the Mark IIa, we've just increased the armament, and as a result increased the battle rating by an integer, i.e. +1. Now as a result, that means when we talk about the Spitfire Mark 2B, we can't just say it's the Mark 2A but with better armament. We have to consider it in the perspective of the increased competition. And straight away, the climb rate of this aircraft is as reliable as ever. The only planes that are going to outclimb you at your battle rating tier are the likes of the Messerschmitt 109 F4, but that's by approximately a 300 metre margin over the course of 2,500 metres gained. So it's a minimal margin and it will not make too much of a difference for that initial engagement. We swoop down here on a C205 Series 3 and they're proving evasive at first, and as we go to higher and higher speeds, what we're seeing is that our control surfaces are becoming less responsive. Now more detail on that a little bit later as we pick up our first kill, because we now need to deal with a Messerschmitt 109F that's descending on our 6. And we can see here how the limited dive speed acceleration of the Spitfire Mark 2B means that Messerschmitt 109 is going to catch up to us very quickly and we need to take evasive action. Our logic being we're going to form a set of vertical scissors and over successive cuts hopefully cause the Messerschmitt 109 to end up in our gun sights. On the third cut that occurs, and this F4 gets away with it, as we score a couple of hits on their cooling system, but there we can see how the approximate engagement distance of 200 metres meant that our 400 metre gun convergence let us down somewhat. But we've done enough damage to that F4 to push them away and get them to target somebody else. In the meantime, as we break away then, let's talk about high speed manoeuvrability. The Spitfire Mark 2B experiences lock-up across all three control surface domains at higher speeds. Now we might as well tackle the control surfaces in general as well. Your roll rate is rather good. Now it's not Focke-Wulf 190 A1 level or P47D Thunderbolt level, but it's more than enough to enable you to switch up directions on the fly, so long as you keep your speed below 500 km an hour, at which point you'll experience a lock-up in this control surface which maximises at 750 km an hour and means you only retain 25% of your standard roll rate. As for your rudder, which is rather snappy, but do keep in mind that below 250 km an hour, excessive use of your rudder will actually cause this plane to become incredibly unstable in flight and can cause it to enter spins. Your rudder will maintain its controllability all the way up to 650 km an hour, at which point it will lock up by 750 km an hour to leave you with only 50% of the initial performance. And as for your elevator, well again, a good control surface, highly responsive, and means you can perform some rather tight loops as we come up towards this B-18 bomber here. Your elevator experiences a lock-up from 600 to 700 km an hour, retaining approximately 40% of its original controllability. And there we can see we take out the tail control of the B-18 bomber and we break up towards the C205 who is above us, but too interested in bringing down our bomber, and it means we can cut them apart for another kill. Noting how we just ran out of ammunition there, and that brings us on to our next point, which is ammo capacity. Now the Spitfire Mark 2B with 120 cannon rounds, you may be thinking at this point, well that's sufficient. Well the problem is, as you probably noted, for example in that dogfight against the Messerschmitt 109 F4, in the approximate second we had on the target, and we're going to see it here against the Corsair, we exhausted in the space of a second 20 cannon round. Now as a result, what that means is you will exhaust your ammunition in this plane rapidly, as we exhaust a load of ammo there against the Corsair in the space of approximately 2 seconds, almost wasting 40 rounds. Therefore, going for reloads between engagements is going to be very useful, as in successive engagements you'll typically find that you will run out of cannon ammunition if you're not careful in your trigger finger. Of course you have the machine guns to back you up, and this is a very nice asset to have because the machine guns in their own right do a good amount of damage, albeit you now have 4 rather than the 8 you're used to on the predecessor sub-variant. But the cannon will get the job done so long as you have the ammunition to get the job done in the first place. Now outside of this, what one has to also consider, as we've seen so far, is that we've been mixing things up. But one thing that has left us feeling a little bit mixed is the fact that the speed of this plane actually feels rather poor at its battle rating. Now let's articulate this a little further. Note the B-25 we're going after right now. We're picking up some speed in our dive, but as we said earlier, our dive speed acceleration is not the greatest and it falls far short of the likes of say a C205, a Messerschmitt 109, etc. as we cut apart the B-25 for another kill. The issue is that the Spitfire Mark 2B has a phenomenal climb rate, and that means that we can gain altitude very quickly, as we're going to do so above this G55 here. But in terms of straight line acceleration, when your stall speed of 140 km an hour all the way up to 400 km an hour, you have decent acceleration, and you can accelerate this up to 475 km an hour by adding in more emergency power, as we swing over the top of the G55 here and bait them out to cause them to stall. Noting that we take a limited amount of damage to our tail section thanks to their 20mm cannon, More on that in a bit and the implications of taking damage in this plane. But because of our limited ability to get to excessive speeds, and indeed our straight line acceleration not being as good as some of our adversaries, it means that a lot of the time we're going to end up fighting within a particular space of the sky. And for those who are interested in the history behind the Spitfire in general, you'll know that the plane was designed as a defensive fighter, or that's how it was implemented, for example in the Battle of Britain. And that really does echo through now at the battle rating of 3.7, the fact that unlike some of your adversaries, you will be confined to a particular space in the sky for a good period of time. And that can lead to some frustration, especially if you end up drifting over the enemy spawn, because you may not want to spawn kill your opponents or spawn trap them, but you get stuck there at the fact that you can gain the altitude from them as quickly as anyone else. But when you try to accelerate away off into the distance, your foes begin to keep with you. And really you have to play in the vertical rather than the linear or the horizontal for speed. Of course you can turn fight against your foes, and that's what we saw there against the B-25 coming up towards us. We just gained altitude over them and they couldn't follow us because of their insufficient climb rate by comparison. Now without that hoping putting you off of the plane, let's talk a little bit about durability. The durability of the Mark IIB is actually quite low. In particular, its control surfaces take an incredible amount of damage when hit, as we saw there against the G55 that scored a couple of hits on our tail section, even if they were glancing blows with their cannon, and it appears as though our tail section's gone brown already. This plane, if hit, is likely to lose a control surface if it receives a sustained burst, and in general, when you take hits to your control surfaces in this aircraft, you will notice a massive drop off in controllability in that domain. So if you take damage, for example, to your elevator, you'll find that your elevator's performance just drops off drastically. Alternatively, if you take hits to your rudder and your elevator, this plane becomes incredibly unstable in a straight line, especially at the lower speeds, so below 300 km an hour. And therefore this is a plane that prides itself on the pilot not getting it into a situation where it's going to get hit, which is why it can be dangerous to tease out opponents to shoot at you whilst you're causing them to stall out by the means of a hammerhead or ruddering over the top of them. But one thing we haven't talked about is turn circle and rudder turn circle. Now if you do your standard roll 90 degrees and turn on the elevator, you'll find that the turn circle you have here is one of the best at its battle rating and tier, whereby the only thing that's going to be outturn you is the likes of an A6M2 or the Ki-43-2, or we can generalise to your Japanese fighter counterparts. Otherwise you'll have a turn circle that can outfox the likes of say Yak-3, a Messerschmitt 19F4, the Typhoon Mk, etc. The list goes on. And if you employ your landing flaps as well, your turn circle for a limited period of time will match the likes of a Zero or come incredibly close to it. And that's because your landing flaps will cause you to bleed a significant amount of speed, and with the drag that implies, it causes a nice amount of lift and it can really get you to bring the plane around. But at the same time, the cost of using your landing flaps is that you will bleed an excessive amount of energy and you should only use them on a limited basis. And what you'll hopefully see over the course of this gameplay, we rarely use them unless we really want to tighten our turn circle or bleed some energy in a limited period of time. And the reason we're just watching the SM-79 here is to make sure they're not trying to go for a head-on. We're a little bit sceptical about taking any damage to the plane, with our durability being limited as expressed earlier. Now outside this, what else is there to note? Well, in general, in terms of energy retention, this plane doesn't too bad in the energy retention category, whereby it's buffeted somewhat by the performance of the engine and indeed the likes of the climb rate, whereby when you're coming out of boom and zoom passes, you can typically regain all the energy that you've sacrificed in terms of potential energy in dropping altitude. But when you think about it as well, one has to consider it's about the smart management of your assets here. As we said, the landing flaps will bleed a significant amount of kinetic energy, and it's when to use those against when not to use them, as we gradually pick up another kill on that SM-79. Outside this, one has to also consider the fact that because we're taking a very mixed role in this plane and we're rather sceptical of our durability, this plane should not be seen as a dedicated bomber hunter. And due to the concerns we expressed earlier about the plane's ability to stretch itself across the sky, i.e. its ability to pick up speed and whatnot, we have to be concerned with the fact that this is not an interceptor aircraft, this is more of a point defence fighter. But the role we're using it in here means that it can be flexible. It doesn't have to be dedicated just to turn fighting or engaging foes within a specific region, but there will be better options for this. The likes include, for example, the Typhoon Mk, the Messerschmitt 19F4, the Yak-3, bit of a list by comparison. And as we come around here, having picked up another kill on the Heinkel 112, we can see that the game's coming to its end, and now we're going to go into an extended boom and zoom pass, and you're going to see the sacrifices you have to make in boom and zoom passes due to the lock up of your control surfaces at higher speeds. And it's also worth noting that whilst not echoed in this gameplay as such, this plane's overall engine performance drops away below 2,000 meters altitude to ground level somewhat and does the same above 6,500 meters altitude. So the ideal altitude range for this aircraft, in my opinion, is between 2,500 to 5,000 meters altitude. In terms of speed, you want to keep your speed between 350 to 450 km an hour when going into a dogfight, as then you'll have all your control surfaces fully available. But as we miss this P-38 Lightning completely here out of frustration, just a little bit poor aim on our part, the game ends and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. With our 7 kills and 3 assists, we picked up 24,520 silver lines and 3,046 research points. To defeat the Spitfire Mk then, there are 3 options in my experience. The first, the more limited option, is if you're flying a plane that's more manoeuvrable, such as the A6M2 or the KI-43 Mark III, and that is to turn fight for this aircraft, as you will have the superior manoeuvrability over time. Just be wary for the Spitfire pilot using their landing flaps at a given period to try and close the distance in the turn. The second option, and this is for your more typical examples, is where you do not have the manoeuvrability to match or gain an advantage over the Spitfire at the lower speeds, so i.e. below 500 km an hour, and the logic here is to simply try and get above the Spitfire, or alternatively evade them for the time being, because they're not going to be able to outrun you as expressed in the course of the gameplay, but instead wait until they're down low and bounce them from above via boom and zoom runs. As when you start to score hits, the durability of the airframe will show itself and the plane will fall out the sky. The third option, if you've got no way out, is to go head to head if you've got nose mounted armament in particular, such as on a Yak 3, whereby the Spitfire's wing mounted armament will be convergence aligned and put the plane at a disadvantage if the gun convergence used is at shorter distances, such as demonstrated today. But by avoiding all 3 circumstances, hopefully we've demonstrated that the Spitfire Mk2B retains the performance of the Spitfire Mk2A, but sees an increase in firepower, which is very welcome. A couple of things we perhaps did not point out, however, in terms of the firepower advantage is the fact that now that you've got this greater punch, you also have to consider the fact that you do have a higher amount of recoil, and you will notice at lower speeds in particular, below 400 km an hour, you will experience some side-to-side recoil when you open fire. But besides from that, the firepower is very strong and enables you to defeat a lot more foes more rapidly. But the downside is, now that your battle rate has increased, you're starting to see multiple flavours of planes dedicated for certain operations, whether it be interception, dogfighting up at higher altitudes and using boom and zoom tactics, or turn fighting. And it really means you've moved into a jack-of-all-trades space, which is nice, but at the same time it can leave you wanting. Whether it be a case that your dive speed isn't the best, 904 km an hour versus the higher amounts you can see, or your turn circle isn't the best, or your durability isn't up to scratch for bomber interception. But still, with its mixed characteristics and its all-round strengths, I would say that the Spitfire Mk2B will still be a firm favourite in most players' eyes. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.